The Baltimore Ravens lose to the Miami Dolphins 42-38 in an epic collapse. We talk about that, what's next for the team, and more coming up here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcasts on all platforms. That includes over on YouTube in video form. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less, and their Prize Picks are jacking, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. We are back here. Our first non-victory Monday for the Ravens of 2022, and honestly, what should be the second victory Monday, with Baltimore collapsing in epic, unimaginable, chaotic fashion against the Miami Dolphins, blowing a 21-point lead in the fourth quarter, being outscored 28-3 and losing 42-38. Now, we're going to have some conversations about this game. We're going to talk about what this team needs to do moving forward because, look, there were some aspects of this game that were great, but the thing that overshadows it is just how poorly, how terrible that fourth quarter was, and that is a big talking point, as it rightfully should be. So we'll talk about the offense in the first segment, the defense in the second segment, and just what this team has to do moving forward in the final segment. If you want to support the show, though, thank you again. Be sure to subscribe, like this video on YouTube, follow along in audio form here, anywhere you get your podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. If you're already subscribed, already following along, thank you so much. If you aren't or considering it, we put out Daily Ravens content 5 days per week, so if you want Daily Ravens news, analysis, updates, we're here for you. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow along with us there. Be sure to follow me on Twitter as well, at KSRicker34, and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. But yeah, so let's dive into this here. Offensively for the Ravens, look, Lamar Jackson had a really, really, really great day. If you look at this game and the first thing you think is, oh, this loss is on Lamar Jackson, I don't know what to tell you because he played really, really well. And that's one of the worst things about this loss is that it really spoiled, I think, one of the best all-around performances we have seen from Lamar Jackson during his time in a Ravens uniform. Jackson finishes this football game completing 21 of 29 passes, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns. He averaged 11 yards per pass. That's incredible. Had a 142.6 rating at halftime of this game. Lamar Jackson had more touchdowns than incompletions. He had 3 touchdowns and 2 incompletions. He also added, you can't forget about this, he added 9 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown on the ground, a 79-yard straight up the middle run where he has done that time and time again, and he is just such a threat both with his arm and with his legs. Now, we did have some mistakes towards the end of the game. Obviously, he had a throw that could have been a pick six pretty easily by Xavier Howard. Howard luckily dropped the football. It didn't really matter in the end, though, but there were a couple throws where you maybe thought, oh, Jackson should have done this here or done that there, but Jackson was phenomenal in this game. The price of Lamar Jackson, and as I tweeted this out, it was never going to go down. It's only going up, and I still believe it skyrocketed despite this loss in this game. I tweeted out the bring me my money thing when Lamar Jackson was torching the Dolphins, and people said, oh, that didn't age well, and I said, no, it did not age well. I mean, Lamar Jackson still played well with the team that ended up collapsing, but you have Jackson connecting and really establishing a connection, which I really do like with Rashad Bateman and obviously Mark Andrews. Bateman had 4 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown. Mark Andrews 9 for 104 and a score, as they likely getting involved. Devin Duvernay having a couple of nice plays, but the thing that overshadows this offense, and again, it's a little frustrating because it takes away from what Lamar Jackson did. The Ravens do not have a run game right now. They absolutely do not. It is a huge concern. It is a huge issue. Lamar Jackson carried the ground game in this game, which he has done many, many times throughout his career in a Ravens uniform. If you take out Lamar Jackson's stats in this game, so the Ravens ended up as a team, you put Lamar Jackson in there, 25 carries, 155 yards and a score, right? 6.2 yards per carry, pretty respectable overall. You take out Lamar Jackson's 9 for 119 and a score. The Ravens carried the football 16 times for 36 yards. And that is not good. In fact, it is really, really bad, especially coming off of a game against the Jets where the run game was really ineffective as well. This is 2 straight weeks where the offensive line can't get a push up front. The running backs aren't seeing holes when they are there. It is an overall mess. This team misses J.K. Dobbins. They miss Gus Edwards. And we'll talk a bit about this in the second segment. But when Dobbins and Edwards return, I know we've talked about it before, they're not going to be thrown out there for 100% of snaps. It might take a little bit for them to get into the full J.K. Dobbins that we saw in 2020 or the Gus Edwards that we've seen, right? So you have to have these running backs step up like Kenyon Drake, like Mike Davis, like Justice Hill. I mean, just to put it in perspective a little bit, just a little, Mark Andrews with 1 carry for 3 yards averaged more yards per carry in this game than Mike Davis at 0.8, Kenyon Drake at 1.3. So you have Mark Andrews out yards per carrying running backs on this team. And it wasn't like, Mark Andrews only had one carry and then, Drake had 15 or something. Drake had 6 carries. Davis had 5. But the final stat lines, Kenyon Drake, 6 carries for 8 yards. Mike Davis, 5 carries for 4 yards. Justice Hill was the only semblance of maybe competency at the position, 3 for 16. Even though that's not amazing, he still averaged, or you call it respectable, 5.3 yards per carry, but it was only on 3 carries. This is also on the offensive line. The offensive line didn't do a great job in the run game, didn't get a ton of push. And it is, again, something that I am extremely concerned about. And they have to figure it out quickly because teams, and just like we saw with Miami, are starting to catch on to the fact that, hey, if the Ravens can't run the football, we don't have to commit as much to that, and then they can utilize their DBs in other ways, or they don't have to stack the box as much and focus on the Ravens passing game and trying to stop that. They have to be able to get a push. And look, sometimes when defenses stack the box, it absolutely is tougher to run the football, but you have an offensive coordinator in Greg Roman who is known for his rushing offenses. The personnel for him right now might not be super ideal, and the fact that, look, he doesn't have his all-pro left tackle. 2 extremely talented running backs aren't there as well. But he's somebody who has made his bread and butter in this league in the run game. So I would expect the run game to be a little better than it has been these first 2 weeks. So, look, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat things and say, oh, everything is sunshine and rainbows. Everything's going to be okay. That stuff can definitely be okay. Like, I'm not saying the season's over, right? I'm not saying the Ravens will never have a run game this season, but through 2 weeks, right? I give credit where it's due. I give criticism where it's due. The run game has not been up to par. We saw that on 4th down. The 4th down plays, the Ravens have to rip out like half the 4th down play sheet and just burn it, throw it into the abyss. They need to redo their 4th down playbook. We've seen it. It goes beyond 2022. The Ravens, part of the reason they lost this game was because they could not convert on you had 4 plays inside the Miami 4-yard line early in this game. The Ravens could not convert any points. The Ravens get stuffed on 4th and 1 on a, botched snap between Tyler Linderbaum and Lamar Jackson where it looked like Jackson was at fault. But, stuff happens there. It's unfortunate. But then another 4th down in 1 play, it happens again where the Ravens cannot convert on 4th down, and you argue in that situation to John Harbaugh punted the football. You can argue hindsight, but look, with how aggressive the Ravens have been on 4th down, honestly, for me, like when you get when the Ravens get into like almost like their own 40, their own 45, I'm telling people like, hey, this is 4-down territory for them, and I think that might be a little too aggressive. When you're talking about you have the best kicker in the league in Justin Tucker, you have a very good punter in Jordan Stout. I understand the analytics aspect of things, but sometimes, I think the Ravens will reevaluate how they do their 4th downs, not only from a play call perspective, which I think does have to happen, but also just in terms of how aggressive do they want to be, because giving the ball back to Miami in the field position they did late in that game really cost them. Like, again, it didn't matter at the end of the day. The Dolphins still scored and whatever. But you still give them your defense a better chance, regardless of how badly they were struggling, which they were struggling. We'll talk about it. You still give them a better chance with it with a longer field. So that's something. Team stats in this game, other than, we've already talked about. The Ravens went 3 of 10 on 3rd down. That's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad 3rd down rate. I thought they did a little better earlier in the game. I actually didn't know it was this bad until I actually looked at the stats a couple minutes before hitting record here. But I thought that their third down, especially in third and short situations, they just weren't converting. One of the keys to this game for me was getting the Ravens getting into second and short, third and short situations, and they couldn't convert on a lot of them. And so now I kind of have to add to that and say, hey, get into those situations and convert on them. We talked about the fourth downs. They were 1 for 3 on fourth down. But look, Baltimore had 473 yards. 38 points is usually enough to win you a football game, right? That's why I'm not placing the blame. Look, I thought Greg Roman, for the most part, called a solid game earlier on, right? We saw some of the trickeration with the Mark Andrews under snap thing on that one play, which I thought was really cool. But there were also some times where you're just thinking, what are we doing here? What are we doing? So I thought that, look, 38 points again, I think that's enough for a team to win a game. The defense just had an epic collapse here, but part of it also was the fact that the Ravens offense could not put any more points up on the board in the fourth quarter than just the 3 on a 51-yard field goal by Justin Tucker. So there are multiple contributing factors to how this game went, both on offense and on defense. But again, it just takes away from what Lamar Jackson did and how good of a performance he had. And I want to continue to highlight that because, look, this game, again, was not on Lamar Jackson. They have to figure out the run game, figure it out on fourth down, figure out how to convert in those third and short situations, because in this game also, the Ravens, you would think, hey, they're up by 3 scores, 35-14. Can you believe that? 35-14, they lose 42-38. But you would think that the Ravens would be able, as we've seen so many times, get the ball back, run the clock out. You get we saw an 18-play drive by the Ravens. Now, they didn't come away with points on it, but we saw that 18-play methodical drive by this Ravens offense earlier in the game. You would hope that later in the game, when the team needs the clock to be run out, because you just can't trust the defense, they could do it, but they couldn't. The Dolphins blitzed for the majority of the day. The Ravens handled it very well in the first half, not as well in the second half. But I tweeted out, I said, look, when the Dolphins tied that game up late in the fourth quarter, I said the Ravens offense has to run the clock all the way down and score and win this game that way, because you cannot trust the defense the way it was playing. The Ravens get the 51-yard field goal. They left about 2 minutes and some change on the clock for 2-1 company, and the rest is history. Just methodical plays by that Dolphins offense, and the game went how it went. So definitely a strong performance by Lamar Jackson. The run game, again, huge concern, some areas they have to clean up on, but the defense is a whole nother story. We'll be talking about that in our second segment coming up here on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Prize Picks. And Prize Picks, fantasy's been in my life for a really long time now. It's been a staple. We're doing the Locked On Ravens fantasy leagues. I've been winning some, been losing some, but Prize Picks is a different way to look at things. You can have multiple different entries. It's really easy to use. You can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go score more or less, and their Prize Pick projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against any other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball as well. And just can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You have safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. You can download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. If you want to support the show, support the channels here, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. Thank you so much. And also, I want to say thank you for listening after a loss. I know that losses can be very difficult to go through the sports media cycle and listen to shows, watch TV, do whatever, scroll through Twitter. So I appreciate you listening here or watching here, especially after a really tough loss like this. It really doesn't go unnoticed, and I appreciate it. But something I did not appreciate was the Ravens' defensive performance in that fourth quarter, as I'm sure many Ravens fans did not. The Ravens were up again 35-14 in this game in the fourth quarter. They blow a 21-point lead. They lose 42-38. A lot of this falls on the defense. Now, I honestly don't know where to start in this game. Let's start with the stats. Let's start with the stats from the Dolphins' perspective on offense. Tua Tagovailoa in this game, this is going to get ugly. 36 of 50, 469 yards, 6 touchdowns, did have 2 interceptions. He threw the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle 22 times for almost 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill had 11 receptions, 190 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jalen Waddle, 11 receptions, 171 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think a stat that I saw was that Waddle and Hill are the first 2 teammates to have like 10 plus catches, 150 plus yards, and 2 touchdowns in the same game ever. That might not be exactly right, but I think it's around that. Regardless, it was a record-setting performance in multiple different ways for this Dolphins team. And for Lamar Jackson, too, he broke a record of his own, so congratulations to him. But part of the reason that I think that so many people are so frustrated, and look, there are plenty of reasons here. You know what Tyreek Hill can do. You know what Jalen Waddle can do. Make someone else beat you. You know, it's not that simple, obviously, right? Tyreek Hill is very skilled and Jalen Waddle skilled as well. But it seems like, and the Ravens were doubling Tyreek Hill. They were trying to get the ball out of their hands. But regardless, these guys were still just crushing the Ravens. And it wasn't just in the fourth quarter, which they did a lot of their damage, but throughout the entire game. Look, I'd be completely content if the Ravens had, done what they could absolutely to stop these 2 guys. And, Mike Gesicki beats them or Trent Sherfield or someone like that, Chase Edmonds, one of those guys. But you understand what the threat of Tyreek Hill is. You understand what the threat of Jalen Waddle is. Throw everything, throw the bus at them and just make sure they don't make plays, especially deep. And this was my number one key. I talked about it all week for the Ravens and just what they had to do. And it's something that we saw a lot last year. And I know some people were kind of frustrated with it, but against a team like Miami that can just win the vertical game so hard, so fast, like we did see, one of the huge keys in this game for me was to just let up some short stuff when you needed to, inside the 20 or between the 20s. You allow some of that short stuff. You don't let Tyreek Hill beat you deep. You don't let Jalen Waddle beat you deep. You give up some plays between the 20s. You kind of strengthen up in the red zone, as we saw the Ravens do, and we have seen them do in the past, and you force the Dolphins into kicks. If you can end every possession, if your opposing offense, you end that possession in a punt or a field goal, you usually do enough to win the football game. What the Ravens were doing was they were giving up plays of 60-plus yards, 20-plus yards, 40-plus yards, and it was getting chunk play after chunk play after chunk play. And part of the issue with the Ravens giving up the short stuff, which I think they did do, I'm not saying they never did it, but when you would see Tyreek Hill flash across the middle and catch a short slant or whatever, or Jalen Waddle do the same thing, the Ravens were missing tackles. They missed a lot of tackles in this game. And look, Tyreek Hill's hard to bring down. Jalen Waddle's hard to bring down. I'm not saying it's easy and they should have done it because it's so easy. It's not. But it was little missed tackles, and this wasn't just in the fourth quarter. Throughout the entire game, we saw a missed tackle here that Tyreek Hill was able to get 7 extra yards. Another one here, Jalen Waddle able to get 10 more. 2 missed tackles there, 2 missed tackles here. The Ravens didn't do a great job tackling in this game. I think they did in some aspects, but if you go back and watch some of the film, there were some missed tackles in this game that you kind of just think, the Dolphins wouldn't have picked up 7 extra yards here or first down here or whatnot. I also think Mike McDonald in the fourth quarter did not call his best game. In fact, he's only called 2 in the NFL, so I think I would classify this as his worst. Because of the fact that, look, we saw the Ravens start to disguise a lot. I just wouldn't have gotten too cute with it. Your defense is getting beat. You don't have to send pressure. First of all, the Ravens blitzed on a couple plays late in this game, and that allowed Tua to just get the ball out quickly. Something I talked about for the Ravens offense. How do you beat the blitz? It's the short passing game. You have all these guys running at your quarterback. You have one-on-one situations. Get the ball out quick. Let your playmakers do their thing. Maybe get some blockers out there if you can for some screen passes. The Dolphins were able to take advantage of that very much so. So it wasn't just the deep passing game. It was also the short passing game. I mean, let's face it. The Ravens secondary, they had nothing left in the cupboard. Everybody was either injured or almost injured or coming back from injuries or just called up off the practice squad. It was all over the place. Marlon Humphrey couldn't play for a lot of this game because of his injury. He was in and out for the entire game, spent the last possession of this game on the sideline. Marcus Peters was coming back for his first game in 611 days. You're not going to throw him out there for 100% of snaps and say, hey, here's a full workload for you coming off a torn ACL and you haven't played in over 600 days. So he was in and out a little bit throughout the game. They had to have him in on the final possession, though. The Ravens didn't have Brandon Stevens. Kyle Fuller, obviously on injured reserve. They lost Pepe Williams pretty late in this game. So really, the Ravens technically only had 3 healthy cornerbacks by the end of the game. It was Marcus Peters, who again hadn't played in over 600 days. It was Jalen Armour-Davis, who was playing in his first really big spot NFL action in this game against guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You had Darrell Worley, who was called up off the practice squad. They had to bring in Geno Stone. They had to get creative with it. And on top of that, they lose Steven Means. He was quickly ruled out with an ankle injury. He was carted off the field, so that's not a good sign. The Ravens had to use Malik Harrison as a pass rusher. They only have 2 off the outside linebackers again on their roster, and not really anything you can call up on the practice squad right now. Not really anybody you can feel confident in calling up and saying, oh, all right, like the only guy that they really have right now is a new addition who's only been there for like 2 weeks. So I think when you're talking about that, I think a veteran like a Jason Pierre-Paul or a Devon Kennard, who we've talked about, it's important for them to be able to rush the passer. The Ravens, that's another thing. We'll talk a bit more about the secondary, but the Ravens pass rush, they did not get to Tua a lot in this game. In fact, only 1 sack on Tua for this Ravens defense after we had spent the whole week here praising the interior defensive pass rush, praising Justin Houston. Well, Justin Houston had a good game. I'm not going to say Justin Houston didn't. He had a good game, got pressure on the quarterback. Odafe Owe was getting double teamed a little bit, but the interior pass rush was pretty non-existent in this game overall, at least compared to what we saw in week 1 against the Jets. But this really does fall on just an epic defensive collapse by the Ravens and in a fourth quarter where you would think being up by 21 points, the way the Ravens offense was playing, even the way the Ravens defense was holding the Dolphins, it was unbelievable to watch. And the worst part about it, and look, I can name off like 10 worst parts about this game, but the inevitability that you just felt watching it happen before your eyes. You think 1 touchdown, all right, whatever. The Ravens will come back and they'll do their thing, fail on 4th down. All right, fine, but the defense can step up. You have a bomb touchdown. All right, well, the Ravens offense will come back. They can't convert. They have to put the ball away and put it back in Miami's hands. Every time it happened and the defense gave up play after play, the inevitability sunk in. And again, I go back to my tweet where I said, look, the Ravens have to run this clock all the way down and score at the end of this game when it's tied, because you cannot trust the defense. It's hard to trust the defense the way that it happened. And lo and behold, again, the Ravens get the 51-yarder with Justin Tucker. They give the ball back to Tua with about 2 minutes and some change left. And the rest is history. Again, that short, methodical drive, or I guess it was a long drive because they had to go out on the field. But in a short amount of time, the Dolphins went pretty much the length of the field, scored the touchdown, win the game. So, it was a performance to forget. This will be talked about for a really long time. I don't think Ravens fans will be able to escape this one for – John Harbaugh said it's what was one of the better comebacks in NFL history here that we've seen, and probably the worst comeback for the Ravens that they've ever had happen to them. There are a couple you can put up there for sure, don't get me wrong, but this is definitely in contention. So there's a ton to, I'd say, look forward to in terms of just forgetting this one and putting it in the rearview mirror. But again, you cannot ignore some of the stuff that happened in this game. And in our final segment, we'll be talking a bit about what that stuff is, how you move forward from this if you're Baltimore, what's next for this team. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, and the UK. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip, get a classic luxury car for a special event like a birthday or a holiday, or find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms and conditions and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. After the Ravens' epic collapse of 42-38 defeat to the Miami Dolphins, they moved to 1-1. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen here. Again, if you want to support the channel, support the show, be sure to subscribe here on YouTube, follow along in audio form, and thank you so much again. But despite the loss here, season's far from over. I know it's cliche, it's cheesy, whatever, but we are 2 weeks into this season. But things do have to change when you're talking. And we'll get into this throughout the week, obviously, as it goes on. But the run game, as we talked about, some of the late game finishing by the defense, miscommunications were huge. We didn't really get into it in the second segment, but back end miscommunication, something we saw so much in the Ravens games last year when we watched this team. You had Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton lining up in the same place. Jalen Armour-Davis not moving on the Tyreek Hill touchdown, where it seemed like they wanted safety up over the top, but there was no safety there to help over the top because they were both lined up in the same place down at the line of scrimmage. So it's plays like that. And look, the Ravens were playing with a lot of rookies in their secondary on Sunday. Kyle Hamilton, Pepe Williams, Jalen Armour-Davis. And I don't want to take away from what Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis did overall. I think for the action they were thrust into here, they both made a couple of really, really nice plays and actually gave me a lot of hope for the future moving forward. But against guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, it's tough in your second ever NFL game to go out there and do that, especially when you're playing your first significant defensive snaps at the NFL level. So the Ravens need to rely on their veterans. I mean, Marcus Williams had another good game, 2 interceptions, but did drop that crucial third interception that honestly, if he's able to haul that in, it was another tough one. He made two super tough, amazing catches. The ball kind of ricochets in the air a little bit. If he's able to bring that one down, the Ravens probably win the game. They probably win the game there. So just things they have to work on. The fourth downs, I think they have to reevaluate that. You have to be able to make this offense multidimensional. Lamar Jackson did talk about the fact that, look, this is not the old Ravens. This is a new NFL. I think the passing game does have to be an emphasis for sure, but you have to run the ball effectively also. You have to have your run game feed off of the pass game, the pass game feed off the run game. Lamar Jackson understands that, right? He knows that. The Ravens know that too, but I don't know where the Ravens go from here run game wise. We'll dive into it over the course of the week here, but I think one thing that at least right now, unless something changes, is the Ravens, when Gus Edwards comes back, my odd man out is Mike Davis. Mike Davis has not impressed me at all. Sadly, I'm rooting for him, but so far he is not impressed whatsoever. I think Kenyon Drake's gotten a little unlucky on his runs sometimes. He hasn't really shown a lot either. If you told me he showed nothing, I wouldn't really argue with you, but I think that sometimes on some of his plays, we'll see guys pushed back into the, offensive linemen pushed back into the backfield, free rushers, and he just gets stifled a little bit without really having time to see stuff. But regardless, right, it comes down to the offensive line too, because I've said it all starts up front so many times on this show. Or look, I've said it. You can have the best quarterback, the best running backs, the best wide receivers, the best tight ends. If your offensive line cannot block, there's not a lot those guys can do, because you have guys in the offensive backfield, defenders in the offensive backfield every 1 second, 1.5 seconds. So I think for what the Ravens have offensive line-wise, Tyler Linderbaum has definitely struggled. He's had some good moments, but he's definitely still, working his way through some of these rookie struggles here. Ben Powers, the left guard position, what are they going to do there? Nick Boyle, what in the world is going on with Nick Boyle right now? The fact he's been inactive for 2 straight weeks, all due respect to Josh Oliver, right? I think he's a fine player. I don't think he's better than Nick Boyle. I think Nick Boyle offers you too much in the run game to sit him. Is something going on health wise? Is this a load management thing? Are they load managing him like Kawhi Leonard in the NBA? I don't know what the situation is, but I think he has to be active next week if he's healthy. I mean, you have to put your best players on the field. I think Boyle's a better player than Josh Oliver. I think he provides more at this point, and that just is what it is. I think that the Ravens committed so much in the offseason to moving back to more of a run style personnel grouping, or groupings, I guess you'd call them, and not saying they're not going to pass the football. I agree with Lamar Jackson. You have to kind of adapt somewhat to this new NFL. This is not the old Ravens. They're not going back to 2019. 2019 is 2019. That happened. It's done. But you have to be able to understand that, look, the Ravens traded away Marquise Brown, right? I think you look at the personnel decisions in the offseason, bringing in 2 tight ends in the draft, not replacing Marquise Brown to DeMarcus Robinson. The Ravens figured they'd probably run the ball a lot better than they are right now, and it's frustrating for a lot of people. It's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for fans, right? It's frustrating to look at the box score for these first 2 weeks and see a rushing attack that cannot support the passing game right now. And the passing game is played pretty well, all things considered, because of the fact that teams, I think, are just keying on the run game and whatever. But I think at the same time, you have to be able to establish that ground game. And if it's a trend here, again, it's so early in the season where we are only 2 weeks in. Things could change over the next couple of weeks and everything would be okay because you're getting the early season rust off, as we've talked about. But if this continues in week 3, if it continues in week 4, that becomes a trend, and that is not a good trend. The Ravens sorely miss J.K. Dobbins. They sorely miss Gus Edwards. At this point, you might as well bring back Devonta Freeman and see what happens. He looked better in the back half of 2021, and Devonta Freeman's my guy. He was my guy last year at the running back position, so I'll vouch for him a little bit. But it doesn't take the sting out of this loss. It doesn't take away from how good of a performance it was for Lamar Jackson and how it's all washed away and wiped away because the defense couldn't hold up, run game couldn't perform. Right? I think you can argue what was the biggest factor because there are so many factors, whether you think it's the secondary, you think it's the run game, you think it's the defense, you think it's the fourth downs. Definitely a combination of all those things for sure. And it's something that they'll have to work out. John Harbaugh said it. It's about how they respond. And again, you can say it's cheesy or whatever or whatnot, but he's right. You know, that they can't let this dwell. They cannot sit in this loss for too long. They have to learn from it. They have to understand why it happened. They have to adjust. Absolutely. But you can't be thinking about it when you play the Patriots next week. You can't. Bill Belichick will outcoach you. He will use his personnel. The Patriots pulled off a big win against the Steelers. Speaking of the AFC North, all the teams in the AFC North right now are 1-1. It was a very, very bad week for the AFC North. You had the Bengals losing on the last second field goal to the Cowboys. They are 0-2, so I misspoke there. You have 3 1-1 teams and 1 0-2 team in the Bengals. So the Bengals are 0-2. You have the Browns, Ravens, and Steelers all at 1-1. I just said this, the Bengals with that last second field goal loss. The Steelers, they lose to the Patriots and Mac Jones. The Ravens with their 21-point collapse. The Browns blew a 14-point lead in like 2 minutes in the fourth quarter and lost that game. So that was a bad loss for them against the Jets. Joe Flacco, he's still elite, by the way, just putting it out there. But so there is a lot of season left. The Ravens, they're too talented to let this, define their season. It's tough to hear now. I understand because the loss is still fresh, and you kind of look and you go back to how you felt in that moment, especially when you see Tua trotting onto that field in the tie game, and you're kind of sitting there and you're thinking, we all know what's going to happen here. The defense was just, it collapsed. It was in shambles. It felt like there was nothing they could do to stop Tua in that offense, especially once it got down to a 1-score game. And after Tyreek Hill scores that 60-yarder, you're thinking there's no way they can do anything here. And, unfortunately it was right. So they have to bounce back from this. And I think that they can. But it's a matter of health. It's a matter of getting your guys back. It's a matter of being able to run the football, to convert on fourth downs, the secondary, the miscommunications, the fourth down stuff as well. Again, it's all a part of a big, epic, terrible, horrible collapse that we witnessed on Sunday in week 2. So again, tough conversations to have. And I know the Ravens are having a bunch of them throughout this week for sure, and we'll talk throughout the week about just what this means for the team, how they move forward, what happened in this game in more depth. So we still have a ton to talk about this week on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you here today. Thank you so much again for tuning in during a loss here today on the show. I really do appreciate that and appreciate you. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, continuing to digest and break down how everything went wrong in this Miami game and talking about moving forward in week 3 against the Patriots. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.